It's all here for this meeting. I thought before you get looking at the conflict of Tanzania to hear about Libya. Because that's,
Well, one thing is, the first thing I would say is, when the conflict in Libya broke up, African leaders were the first to take action. They formed a committee of 5 heads of state. In South Africa was among them, Uganda was among them, Mauritania, we had Congo, and another country which is escaped me. Mali. This committee went to Libya. They had meetings in Tripoli, they had meetings in Benghazi, they had meetings with Gaddafi, trying to convince him that it is time that he should think of stepping aside. They went to Benghazi. They were the leaders of the rebellion. They said to them, the bottom line is for Gaddafi to leave. Then the leaders left. But then there was the Security Council resolution. The responsibility to protect, create a no-fly zone. I remember we were, last time I was still president, we were in Mauritania discussing the issue of Cote d'Ivoire. But after our meeting on Cote d'Ivoire, the leaders were going to go to Libya. And then an official from the French embassy came to tell President of Mauritania, don't go. Just as simple as that. And the bombing started. So President Zuma took the courage of trying to go to Libya. I think because South Africa is powerful. It's not like other small countries. Yeah, we must admit it. The voice of South Africa is not like the voice of Tanzania. It's a statement of fact. And I think they were able to talk to the powers there. They stopped the bombing for some time. They allowed President Zuma to go to Libya. He met the leader. Immediately after he left, they bombed the place where he met the leader. And then that was the end of the African initiative. Then it was just the bombing, until the leader was killed. Their mission was accomplished, they left. They left the country in the hands of nobody.
But someone is benefiting.
Huh?
Ladies and gentlemen, somebody is benefiting.
No, let me tell you the Libyan story because you want to grasp it. It was left in the hands of nobody. Then there was the National Transition Council. For some time, they tried and made an attempt of parliament. It didn't work out. And then what happened? The Islamists, who were better organized, took over.
We don't have a camera in front.
And then it became now untenable to them that if Gaddafi has left and we left the country in the hands of the Islamists, it's not possible. Then they supported the others now to push the Islamists. And this is the conflict that has been going on and on and on. Okay, later, of course, And then of course you had the UN initiative, the secret agreement that created the Government of National Accord. Okay, we have now the new Prime Minister, we have the Government of National Accord. But in the meantime, another movement has been created under the leadership of Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar. Is that? He calls himself a Field Marshal. If you call him less, he will not accept you. So he's Marshal now. You talk to the Marshal. So you have this kind of situation now. There's also a standoff. You have a Marshal, then you have the government in Tripoli now, and at Fayez Serraj, supported, of course, recognized by the UN, international. Then you have in the east, Marshal Haftar in charge. African Union has created a committee. They appointed me the High Representative, whatever that means. But then, when I was appointed High Representative, the biggest problem I had is that Africa had lost the initiative on Libya. So you have to go through the existing initiative. Now we went through a process, we came to a certain point. Then you have Macron calling the two leaders in Paris. They are agreeing for an election next year. So you know, there's so much complication there. I don't know where we'll get there. But of course, we're meeting again on the 9th of September. We're still on it. We say Africa has to continue to be on the Libyan agenda.
Thank you so much. So, listening to the Libya story, and this is the problem, is that we are here as Africans to talk about cementing foundations for peace and security, for sustained peace and security in Africa. However, we've just been told we have no control over our sustained peace and security in Africa, because if external players decide to come in and bomb, they'll come in and bomb and warn you not to go there because you'll get bombed. Or they'll follow you going there for a meeting and then bomb as soon as you leave. Lack of respect. But then even in Africa's response to these things, have we failed ourselves? Yeah, those saying yes, please put up your hands. Have we failed ourselves that people can come in and do what it is that they want because we don't have the systems, the institutions, the structures? President Becky, I come to you now. President Jakaya Kikwete told us whatever that means. He's been given a title. Whatever that means. And therein is the problem. Maybe it's time for us to say, this is exactly what that means. And it doesn't just take South Africa to stand up. Tanzania can say enough is enough. Yes? Any African country is country enough to say, you know, how do we start this, please, President Becky? What next? How do we take control of the peace and security on our own continent?
You know, Madam Moderator, what I wanted to say on this Libyan thing, the point that was raised by President Obasanjo earlier, there were 3 African member states of the Security Council at the point when that resolution 1973 was adopted. It was South Africa, Nigeria, and Gabon. And all of them voted for that resolution. If they hadn't, that resolution would not have passed.
Why did they vote for it?
I don't know, you must ask them. Because you see, it's quite obvious. It's quite obvious that those ambassadors of ours in New York would have consulted capital with regard to that resolution. And it's capital which said to them, vote for it. Africans. I'm saying if those 3 hadn't done that resolution would have failed.
So we already have a problem in terms of a common voice, a common agenda for Africa, and how to deal with.
But it's the issue he raised earlier about what has happened. What has happened in terms of the African leadership? And maybe he should answer that question, President Hassan.
No, I will. See, the way we operate. Now, I think I have no shame in saying this. Those times, anytime there's an issue like that, I will get up to my plane, I will go to President, I will go to President now, President Thabo Mbeki will have his own area. We have about 4 or 5 people. Whatever those 3 of us have been, President Benjamin Mkapa will go along with us. President Muhai will go along with us. The Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Meles, will have about a dozen of us will go together. And if a dozen of us, Nigeria, Algeria, South Africa, Tanzania, Botswana, will get Ghana at that time, you remember. We will get about, and then we will, how can you have 3 African countries in the Security Council and vote for something that is not supported by Africa? And Nigeria is there, South Africa is there. Now, so that was what I was saying about leadership. Now, I sympathize with President Kikwete. He's trying to say what happened. But what happened is that they did not put their act together. Let's call it spade a spade.
They is weak.
They did not put
They
President
Kikwete's team.
I was talking of the African leaders at the time.
I'm sorry, it may sound very arrogant, but the leadership is disorganized, the leadership lacks courage, and they don't have the guts even to defend their own national interest, let alone the continental one.
Wow. They lack courage. They don't have the guts. They can't even defend their own national interest, and we're here talking about continental interest.
And they don't work together.
And they don't work together. I will
together.
ask again, that's the leadership that we have. Ladies and gentlemen, we have them. They are our leaders. We are in this room as stakeholders and as elders. I'm coming to the floor now. I see their hands. Would any of the other presidents please like to, yes, thank you.
Yes, I think I'll take from what my brother, former president of Tanzania said.
Order, please, ladies and gentlemen.
It is very, very important that the African Union has to take a decisive measure on Libya. We cannot keep on talking. I mean, of course, President Kikwete is going there. What can you do? Apart from taking a plane, goes there, discuss and all that. I think we need more than that. The African Union has to take a decision on this issue. We know the problem in Libya is to do with the oil there. The leaders are fighting, for the wealth which is there, and they will not just give you up like that. There has to be some action of some kind, and I would propose that something has to be done by the African Union militarily to go there in Libya.
Thank you, President Hassan. Very quickly.
I think for Libya, yes, I do agree. It's too late. Maybe some of the action is too late to take. Now, yes, what has been said by President Mkapa and President Obasanjo is absolutely true. Lack of being coordinated, lack of all these qualities that have been mentioned to African leaders are there. But on the other side is what happened to those African leaders who resisted and who refused when these big bosses say something. And then what Africa has done to defend the position of those leaders who say no. To say no, there are certain consequences that follows. So what's important here is we need to work together at the African Union to make the African Union a voice that can collectively decide or that can collectively bargain in the international arena. Like the United Nations Security Council, members of the African Union in the UN Security Council, do they represent their own countries only, or do they represent the continental Africa? So these are some of the issues that needs to be discussed, and I think the focus has to be back again to the African Union and what it stands for.
Thank you for that, but I'll still keep coming back to who then is going to pressure the African Union to do better. What role do you have to play? Yes.
Well, about Libya, I would like to remind you that Libya is, of course, an African country, but it's also an Arab country, and it's also a Mediterranean country. That means that, in fact, you have a lot of players working to defend their own interests. So, for instance, you do know probably that General Haftar is the man of the Emirates, and that he's playing a huge role, you know, as somebody who has to, you know, to stop the wave of the Arab Revolution. Of course, the Italian, the French, the Spanish are extremely interested in what's happening in Libya because they're afraid of the immigration. I think we, of course, as African, we have to intervene, but we must understand that in cases like Libya, specifically like Libya, you have other partners, and we have to work with them. If we want to find a solution to Libya, I'm quite sure that we cannot do it just as African leaders. We have to work to talk to the other partners, European partners, Mediterranean partners, and the Arab partners. Otherwise, the problem wouldn't solve. I'm afraid that it's the same thing everywhere. So, of course, we have to intervene, you have to be present, but we have also to take this problem in account.
Well, I believe what the
very briefly, Mr. President, then we'll hear your question. I'll come to the audience.
What the President has just said is the problem of Libya. Libya is an Arab country. The Arabs are not united on the issue of Libya. It's an African country. It's a Mediterranean country. The Mediterraneans are not united on the issue of Libya. So, and then, as President Kikwete has rightly said, it's now completely out of the hands of Africa. So to ask African Union to take on the job of dealing with the problem of Libya is asking African Union to do the impossible.
Okay, yes, very quickly.
Mine is only a question on this issue of leaders not working together. I think President Obasanjo said something to that effect. But why is it that our leaders are able to work together in the pursuit of their own interest, their own group interest, but not in pursuit of the collective interest of the people? ICC, we supported when we said an African voice, but no internal justice in the countries. And yet, we were quick to have a collective position on ICC. I think that kind of division, that kind of double standard is precisely why we're not moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, noted. And I'm going to start with the questions. There are two ladies on that end, and I'll come this way across the room. Please introduce yourself, make your comment, ask your question, but also, if you are doing something, tell us about it. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Excellencies and our distinguished colleagues in the room, thank you for allowing us to be here in the space. My name is Gwendolyn Myers, and I'm a global youth peace and security advocate. I'm a global shepherd of the Global Shepherds community of the World Economic Forum. I mean, having listened to all of the conversation on this whole issue of peace and security, I really want to bring our attention to a generation that is usually underestimated, and a generation, when I say underestimated, but most of the time used to foment violence and conflict in any conflict setting and any conflict zone, and that has to do with young people on the continent. I mean, talking about sustaining peace and security, we cannot find amicable solution to sustaining peace and security on the continent without investing in the young people on the continent. And when I talk about investing in the young people on the continent, it brings me to this newly adopted Security Council Resolution 2250 that is on youth, peace, and security. And that resolution is looking at 5 key pillars in terms of protection of young people from armed conflict. We look at the active participation of young people. We also look at how do we partner with young people to get them meaningfully engaged. And then the issue of what disintegration and reintegration. But again, I really want to encourage all of us going back to our local communities, because all this conversation is meaningless if it's not having any root in the local communities. How do we build the capacity of young people on the continent? There is nothing wrong with having young people to be part of mediation team. There is nothing wrong at negotiation table to have young people voices to be adequately represented and part of this lead delegation that is going to build peace around the continent. Nothing is wrong with it. Because at the end of the day, it is the same young people who will be used. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Wow. To the lady behind you, please. Thank you. Yes.
Oh, thank you very much. My name is Mujangu Gumbi. I'm a retired lawyer, South African. Let me just say that I think the conclusion that I've come to is that there is no way that outsiders can take you seriously if you don't take yourself seriously. I think that, first of all, I think most of our leaders currently honestly don't take themselves seriously. You look at what President Lungu is doing, you know, it just baffles the mind. You look at Zambia, you look at President Paul Biya, what he's doing baffles the mind. They don't take themselves seriously. And then secondly, they really treat us with contempt. Us, you know, their subjects with contempt. And I can go on and on about that. I think that the solution is to reverse the demobilization of our people. You know, with the Pan-Africanist program succeeding, most of our people were demobilized. Now we've got, you know, Africa is free, finally South Africa is free and all that. So we stepped back from owning our own freedom and taking responsibility for our own countries. And the one good example that I picked up, you mentioned Kenya. You know, after the attack on the University of Garissa, the young people started a movement to say, we will act against, you know, extremism and radicalism. And they work on campuses across the board. That's the only way that we are going to solve this problem.
Absolutely.
We have to re-mobilize at the community level and all of that.
Very powerful. Thank you for that. Gentleman over here, please. Thank you.
My name is Amin Pungo. I'm retired diplomat. Almost made a career out of dealing with conflict. So what has been said here, the issue of conflict resolution in Africa has been dealt with for a very long time, and yet we're not getting anywhere. So I'll pick up from where President Mkapa left, and I think the young lady also pointed out that the leadership capacity internally. And here we have been told that all the retired presidents are dealing with conflicts in different parts of Africa except in their own countries. So in the first instance, I think having, you know, strong leadership within the countries, local statesmen and stateswomen who can intervene whenever there are problems within these countries, I think that's the first starting point. Before going to other countries, I think we also have to address our own internal issues and have leadership that can stand up and, you know, even criticize their former parties that they used to lead, where they are going wrong in terms of peace and stability. Right. Secondly, I think the young lady also made it very strongly. In the light of the new challenges that we're facing, we need different skill sets of leadership. During struggles for independence and liberation, we had people, mobilizers, preachers, trade unionists, mobilizers. But now we're dealing with management of resources and markets. I think we need a new type of, new generation of leadership that can handle the challenges of our time.
Moving from the struggle for independence and freedom to now the struggle for development.
Yeah, that the Deputy Prime Minister of Namibia so eloquently put across. And thirdly, on a more sustainable basis, I grew up in Tanzania. We started as multi-party, then one-party system, and then multi-party. You may criticize the one-party system that we had, but criticize it for everything, but at least we came out as very strong, united country across tribal and religious, whatever.
Right.
Now we ask the question, the multi-party systems that we inherited, are they really working? Because in some countries we see former colleagues during one-party state or during struggles, and then when the multi-party comes, they're bitter enemies. So must we continue with this system of winner takes all? One winning 51, 60, 70, 80%, and taking 100% of the power.
Hard questions.
Can't we have governments of national unity like what South Africa adopted? We had that in Zanzibar, and there was a lot of peace and stability when we had government of national unity. So must we stick to this system?
Thank you so much. Thank you. And a valid discussion to be pursued. Let's come to this side, please, with a mic. Oh, you've got one. Thank you. Go ahead. Yes, we're coming. We're coming. We're coming.
No, thank you. And thank you for the discussion. One of the, I suppose, the key question as a generation of leaders that are coming through Africa is to answer the fundamental question as to whether can you have democracy without Democrats. And this is a fundamental issue of leadership.
Can you have democracy without Democrats?
Because we appoint leaders who their ascension to power is often a competition of resources and an access to resource rather than the strengthening of institutional power in terms of democracy.
Right.
The second question and the point I want to make is that President Obasanjo correctly points out that a poor person cannot claim peace and stability.
A hungry man.
A hungry man can't. And therefore, the fundamental question is that when it comes to issues of inter-regional trade in Africa, those have taken a back door. And so the natural effect of that means that how is it that Nigerians are consuming less South African wine as a question than they would elsewhere? And I'm proposing that perhaps maybe it's critical that Africa creates effective regional trading blocks that can be able to negotiate on trade deals that affect the region in its entirety.
And when you're intertwined, your interests
Correct.
are, yes.
Because now suddenly a businessman that comes from another country is not seen to me as a question of migration, but we have a common interest as Africans to address African issues. And then the third one to ask is this issue of accountability, because I think that has fallen by the wayside. We discuss very often this issue of, the SADC tribunal was set up here to hold leaders accountable and was disbanded. So what happens when people act beyond democratic means, and why is it that we've had a failure of leadership that seeks to hold those leaders to account when they act beyond their constitutions, beyond their mandates, and fail the bipartisan task of uniting the nation rather than pursuing interests and advancing their own almost ethnic groups. So I support the proposal that President Obasanjo makes of a council of elders that can guide this discussion. But I would also propose that we must set up something similar, a bit like to ASEAN in the East, that focuses on trade, that says in regions in Africa, how do we set up trading blocks so that we can advance economic development? For failure to do that, we'll have missed objectives.
Thank you. Please pass to the gentleman at the back. Can we have a mic here? Where is the other mic?
My name is Abdullah Jane. I'm a former Under-Secretary General of the United Nations. Yes. I now head the Africa Governance Institute. I also work for the Mo Ibrahim Foundation as Executive Director. When I listen to President Obasanjo and all the others, the biggest challenge to peace and security are conflicts. And conflicts in Africa, in most cases, are national in order, in nature. You know, it's a breakdown of law and order, it's the promotion of corruption. There are many reasons why conflict erupt in countries. But I'm convinced now, listening to him, that to deal with these nationally created conflicts cannot be done within the borders of the countries. It must go beyond. And therefore, we should find a way of saying who is responsible, how do we apportion responsibility. And what I'm putting on the floor is that it is the backyard of the country which is in conflict that should take the primary role. And if you look at African history, we saw
the regional players.
The regional players must take
Thabo Mbeki is saying no, but we'll come to that in a moment.
I always support him, but let me go here. We will not have solved Liberia, not the exit of Charles Taylor, but Liberia, getting the peace in Liberia without the region. We would not have done the same in Sierra Leone. We would not have peace in Lesotho.
Gambia.
In Gambia. So, it is the regional blocks. What we want is African Union should give legitimacy to these regional institutions. We should strengthen these regional institutions. They should have the capacity where there is early warning system for them to have the guts to go into a country and stop it. But once it's there, it is the regional blocks. And I think this meeting should emphasize the role of the regional and the need to give them resources to be able to pull this role.
The mic is just behind. President Mbeki, I'll come to you in a few minutes to tell us why you disagree. Go ahead, Raphael.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I'm called Raphael Obonyo. I'm from Kenya, but I'm also a youth representative at the United Nations. 3 things. One is the issue of inequality. It is said that the rich man can't sleep because the poor man is awake and the poor man is hungry. For as long as we fail to address the question of inequality, the narrative of Africa rising and Africans are not rising, we will continue facing conflict. So we must ensure equal distribution of resources. The second thing, and which other speakers have alluded to, is the issue of youth. If you want to know the stability of any community, any society, look at the position and the condition of youth. In this continent, 60% of jobless people are actually young people. You do not expect peace and security in a situation where we have jobless young people. Third is the question of leadership. We have a crisis of leadership in this continent. Many years after people like Nyerere left, many years after Nelson Mandela left, many years after such great leaders left, we are still quoting them in terms of positive example. Across this continent, young people like myself are looking for positive example. Leaders who base their leadership on vision, on values, on courage, on servant leadership. It is extremely important. So as we discuss, I think we must also look at those 3 points.
Thank you so much. Lady right now. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Zanele Mazibugo, and I'm a Timali alumni. My question is very basic. I need to ask the House, what happened to the concept of African Renaissance? The reason I'm asking that is because the concept of African Renaissance was to address the question of who we are as Africans, where we come from, and perhaps guide us or give us tools of where we can go or how we can identify our solutions as African. As the Honorable Obasanjo said, that if we are African, we should identify our own solution to sort out our own problems. So I'm standing here very concerned. I'm a young African woman concerned that if as African we could not sustain the concept of African Renaissance, which is a basic issue of who we are as African, how are we going to solve the problems of peace, security, leadership, power, and all? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Wow, okay. Gentleman at the back in the striped suit, please. His hand is up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the panelists. My name is Professor Tim Murithi, Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, Cape Town. I think there's a small elephant in the room that we're failing to grapple with, which is the issue of incumbent presidents who have outlived their best before date, essentially. President Obasanjo said it, the biggest challenge is the failure to grab the bull by the horns. And I think we need to deal with this elephant in the room. we see these former presidents here, they seem quite healthy, quite happy. So there is life after presidency. Concretely, what can the former heads of state do to help us, to encourage those leaders who've overstayed their term of office? Beyond 10 years is too long. 25 years is, and 35 years is ridiculous. Concretely, what can we do? It seems like we can have a program of sorts to encourage these so-called leaders to, in fact, leave their position so that the citizens of Africa can live in peace. Thank you.
Thank you for that. This is why I keep coming to Role of Elders, a respected institution that the continent can look to, and giving relevance to those leaders so they feel there is life after and they go on to do more. Gentleman over here, then I'm coming to this end. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellencies. My name is Wilson Kajrenje. I work as Director of Peace and Security for the ICGLR, the National Conference on the Great Lakes Region. I'm pleased to be here. However, I'm intrigued a bit. There isn't probably anything, and I'm sorry to say, there isn't probably anything new that we are saying that has not been said. The only difference is that these distinguished excellencies are actually saying it when they are out of power. And the challenge is, even when our leaders are in power, they make these commitments and promises, but they never commit, they never respect the commitments. Why are we losing the battle on Libya? Libya is part of Africa. It's an African continent. We have capacity to respond. We have capacity in everything, but why are we losing that? Regionally come here, why do we have conflict in country X and country Y to the extent of an outside power to dictate, to first listen whether America is saying this or UK is saying this? We have our local capacities to do that, but we don't actually do that. Now, having said that, question Professor Funmi. Madam Professor, you said, and it actually worked my mind, war-making state instead of a peacemaking state. Interesting. By nature of a state, looks like, can we actually, is it practical that we can have a peacemaking state? Because by orientation, by posture, a state supposed to hold power to defend itself and defend the people. So I want her to help me, and probably many others,
to understand if we can have a peacemaking state.
Is it practical that we can actually have a peacemaking state?
Thank you. I have to say that some of the leaders here have told us what they did. And in some instances, they did stick their necks out. But what we are saying is, where are the others? Where are the ones who are going to, absolutely. Let me come over here. I see you at the back. I'll come back there in a moment. Yes, I see the different hands. Can we make it as brief as possible so we can take as many questions? Thank you, sir.
I will try. Cristina Duarte, former Minister of Finance and Planning, Cabo Verde Islands, and now I just joined the Uongozi Institute team. Let me start with the story about just that being told by former President of Tanzania. A French official just entered a room, say stop, and a high-level team of African leaders just undo a maybe high-level mission to Libya. Let's stop and think about this small story. I think this is an indicator that they perceive us as having lack of ownership. And this is true. Now I'm not going to talk as a former minister, but as an African citizen. There is lack of ownership in Africa. The feeling that I have that we do not own nothing. Let's ask, do we own our financial resources? Let's say our natural resources? No. Natural resource management in Africa is subject to mispricing, rent-seeking, and we lose billions of dollars per year. Actually, we lose billions of dollars in a footnote of a contract in terms of natural resource management. Do we own our fiscal resources? No. We lose every year $50 billion in illicit flows. At the same time, we wait 3, 4, 5 years to get the same amount to finance infrastructure in Africa, which is a paradox. It seems that we wait for our own money. Do we own our financial resources? No. Our financial reserves, all of them, are overseas. Pension funds, international reserves. So there is a lack of ownership. And I believe that this lack of ownership is avoiding Africa to break the business as usual. I believe that most of the African policymakers are so concentrated in managing poverty in a rich continent. It's not, this is a paradox. So we need to change our ship. And in order to be able to shift from managing poverty, but to manage Africa as a continent with so many resources, in order to do that, we need to take ownership. And I would like to stress what one of the panelists just told us. But in order to take ownership, we need leadership. And I think we need leadership as a development tool, not as a goal by itself. Leadership needs to be exercised. It's not a function. It's not a position.
It is service. It is service delivery. It is service, yes.
To be a leader, I think, is different than exercise leadership. If a leader does not exercise leadership, which happened in Africa, at least he might be a bad boss. At least he might be a bad boss. So you have lack of ownership that is rooted on lack of leadership. And this lack of leadership just produce weak institutions.
Yes, thank you.
And weak institutions will never have peace and security in Africa, never. So it's time for African policymakers to start paying attention, not only to the physical infrastructure of Africa, roads, bridges, airports, but also to the institutional infrastructure in Africa. Because at the end of the day, institutional do matter.
Thank you. Thank you. Very powerful. Thank you for that. We'll come to the gentleman at the front and then the lady. Thank you. Right here.
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Babafemi Badejo. In terms of background, I had spent some 16 years teaching political science at the University of Lagos before spending 24 with the United Nations short of 2 months, in which I was directly in the field on conflicts. Somalia, I spent 13 years of my life, 2 inside Mogadishu, 11 in Nairobi on Mogadishu, as well as Liberia and Guinea-Bissau and Darfur, where I knew. ECOWAS agreed with him. He went to President Jonathan, who took him along to ECOWAS meeting, and ECOWAS overwhelmingly took that position, but that position was thwarted by Portugal, supported by the European Union in the Security Council. ECOWAS could not hold the day at the end of the day. Now, a lot of examples have been given. President Obasanjo going there was because of that constitutional problem. It was after they forced us into restore constitutional order, election. The election took place. You had the Prime Minister and the President deadlocking themselves on the basis of the Constitution, and the country was at a standstill. Now, it could have taken just a few more months to have a dialogue, to have that. But then, that is talking about the problem from the north. But what about the problem amongst ourselves which we are very, very silent about. Neighbors destabilize neighbors effectively. And they even now appoint those who are destabilizing, in some cases, from the African Union to go and solve the problem. They all pretend that they are not aware. Of course, somebody spoke about former president speaking boldly, and I will use President Moi to illustrate what I'm saying. After Moi had left office, he gave a speech in Washington to the military where he said, as far as he was concerned, and Ethiopia, Somalia cannot be back on his feet because it will destabilize them again the way it had done in the past. And then Meles was asked, is what Moi said true? Meles said, Moi is no longer president of Kenya, so he cannot even be talking for Kenya, and he cannot talk for Ethiopia. That was his response. Now, the Council of Elders, we do need it, as President Obasanjo said, but it must have courage, as President Nkapa said, to be able to say these things, even if they are not going to be able to move the process forward, to say it to the world that this is wrong. A neighbor should not destabilize a neighbor and get away with it. By the time it's repeated several times, it may...
We need a bold, courageous Council of Elders who do what needs to be done. I'm going to ask each of the following speakers, please do 30 seconds, and then we'll go back to the panel. Thank you. I see you.
That was always my intention. When I think about Africa, we are a continent of over 1.2 billion people who do want peace, stability, prosperity, justice, and security. And so, as a person who works for an organization that is working to support those things, a peaceful, prosperous Africa, the Institute for Security Studies, and I'm Otilia Anamaunganize, my question is simple. How do we move away from centering accountability, responsibility, and action on a few leaders and make it about those 1.2 billion people?
Wow, very powerful, very good. Please pass it back. I'll take two more. So gentlemen here and one of the gentlemen at the back. Thank you.
My name is Jean-Paul Mugiraneza. I work for Interpeace. I have two questions and also suggestion. One, President Obasanjo says the biggest issue that hinders peace stands with political disagreement. I like the statement, but at the same time, there is something called election in Africa that always results with conflict. There is something wrong there. Either the system is not working, either the democratic system we imported from the independence does not work. We definitely need, I liked a statement made by a person there, I can't remember the name. Does we really need to steal on one voice, one vote, and the winner takes all? We can save half of our problem if we resolve that. And most importantly, to say no to people who want us to put their trousers that are not fitting us.
Thank you, thank you. So one of the gentlemen at the back, thank you.
My name is Victor Azure. I'm one of the winners of the Uongozi Leadership Essay Competition, and I'm a law student.
Congratulations. Excellent.
Yeah, I think this point has also been captured that post-independence, the moral clarity for the demand of independence and the practical imperatives thereof that the colonial master must hand over power waned after independence was gained. So after independence, matching scarce resources with very serious demands, countries began to look inward. And so we've lost the momentum that Africa had fighting for independence. Right. How do we get that momentum back? I think about it as an African, a young person in Africa, that how come that there's, for example, there's no radio station in Africa that broadcasts from everywhere, that we can grow up listening and learning about the whole continent, right, and caring about the issues that can build the momentum for us to one day emerge as leaders and things alike.
So we haven't necessarily talked that much about it, but mindset change for the upcoming generations is absolutely critical. Please, yes.
Thank you very much.
30 seconds, literally.
My name is Khotso, and I'm an Uongozi is finalist. I want to concur with President Obasanjo that Africans, we don't honor the process. We are not masters of our own destiny. If you look at events in America, recent elections in America, recent elections in the Netherlands, recent elections in France, the message is clear that Europe for Europeans. Therefore, we must also say Africa for Africans. Let's own the process. The reason why you have been making noise that you want to be included in the United Nations Security Council and they have not allowed you to do that is because you're not supposed to be part and parcel of the decision making that is going to undermine Africa. Therefore, we as Africans must own this process. Own the process and own the solutions. African solutions to African problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Final word from a lady here, and I go back to the panel. Please, as brief as possible, my dear.
Thank you very much. The starting point of President Obasanjo about conflict having started in the Bible.
Are you going to be able to do this in a minute? I'm kidding.
This is where I wish to apologize. My name is Venson. I'm the Foreign Minister for Botswana. I'll try and be very brief. I'll try and do this 3 minutes. Max? I'll make it 2. The thing that breaks peace has got so many things that we have to worry about. And if we're talking about peace, I don't know how I'm going to do it in 2 minutes, but I'll do my best. First, let's look at the structures, because we are trying to manage society, and we are putting this in the hands of one person whom we don't know, selected or elected by thousands of people, in whom they entrust their lives, their peace, their rights, their economies, everything, including the future of their children. And that person has to be trusted. Now, we have to worry about the structures that they're dealing with. We are Africans. Generally, way back, let me just do a quick throwback. We're used to having chiefs, traditional chiefs. Some of them want to think they are the chief. Some of us who voted them expect them to act like the chief. That's another piece of history, which I hope the director of the institute may have to worry about in her basket of things to worry about in this thing that we must deal with in leadership. Are we dealing with that at any point when we deal with our leaders? It may have to be educated out of our leadership frame as a feature. South Africa is a very good example of what we did with traditional leadership to build it out of. Because when you deal with Republican leadership, it's got nothing to do with traditional leadership. You are leading people of a myriad of expectations, a myriad of tribes and religions who don't care what tribe you belong to, and they have rights that you are going to have to respect. That's just one point. So allow me, I'll quickly go to the next one. You are trusted with their resources, their economies, to put bread on their plate. And they trust you with their wildlife, with their minerals, with their water, with everything that the country has. And you must share it equally and equitably. Their justice system to administer it fairly and transparently. The structures, that is the second thing. What are you going to put into place to make sure that everybody knows you are doing it properly? Now, if you have done a system that is transparent and people know that you are doing it properly, maybe you have a chance at peace. The last point is elections and democracy. Could somebody tell Raila Odinga a no is no? For instance, when people say no, they don't hate you. Today they want this one. They only chose this one for today. So maybe politicians have to be taught that there are two answers in an election. There's a yes and a no. Maybe the Leadership Center should go into another exercise of training elections who run for leadership. That at the end of an election, you can either have a yes vote or a no vote. And a no vote means get out of State House. Thank you.
Wow, okay. Thank you for that. We're coming to the end of the panel, and I want to come back to the panelists. We've had incredible views shared from the floor, but I want us to leave with a parting shot. You started us off with your perspectives. What is the parting shot that we must leave with when it comes to cementing the foundations? And we understand now we've always understood, it's complex, it's dynamic, it's multifaceted. What is your parting shot on this issue, cementing foundations for peace and security? Francois, I'll begin with you at the end.
Thank you very much. I want to conclude by saying that we need to underscore the need to reinforce the conflict prevention and early warning architecture in order to sustain peace and security in Africa. As I was saying, Central Africa region is a very interesting study case. This is a region where there's a lot of wealth, oil, a lot of possibility for agriculture, but the lack of, let's say, alternance, democratic alternance, the weak regional organization, and facing to many challenges. And, you know, most of the leaders in Central Africa region are keeping the office for very long term, sometimes 30 years, even sometimes less, but this is also a fact. And then we need to work with the region in terms of conflict prevention. We are highlighting our effort on the issue of the youth organization with very weak, the women group, the civil society, and we are focusing all our effort on those pillars because we think that can help
a war-making state and a peace-making state. That war-making state, and we can talk on the side without going deep in history. Europe had its own conversation. In the long 18th century, Immanuel Kant's point at the time was about the war between states or between kingdoms and principalities. In order to have perpetual peace, he said, we need to give the decision about war to the hands of citizens. That's why the Republic was proposed. All right? So his point being, his citizens got to decide whether or not they went to war. They were subjects. There will be less war. Internally, though, it was not a resolved issue. But the liberal peace conversation is that democracies don't go to war. And we don't have to deal with that now. In Africa, we inherited states that we did not get to decide whether there will be a war-making state, because that war-making state requires that you have armed forces at any point in time that can control all the means of violence in the country. And see what we've had. We did not have an internal conversation such as that about what gives us positive peace or negative peace, Galtung. We have our own conversations around Ubuntu, Renaissance, and so on. We've never really put it in practice. It means that there shouldn't be indirect violence. It means that there shouldn't be injustice. It means that every citizen should be able to see themselves in the story of their country. What we've had instead is an inheritance elite that has taken all of the machinery of state and of violence to protect itself, not the citizens. So you have to know who your enemy is if you're doing all of that. For many of our states, Nigeria, Benin Republic is not about to invade us. And even if Cameroon tried, it really couldn't. The point is, the collectivity of the citizens must be able to see the expressions of their own aspirations and realize their potential in what the state, through the government, does. That's a peacemaking state. We've not had that conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I must say that we have to accept that we had and we have African leaders that have contributed to the peace process in our continent, and that needs to be recognized. We have also to accept that what we are experiencing now is not new, but these are some of the things that have been mounting over the years. I can quickly talk on Libya. It was in the 80s because Libya, Gaddafi himself is a person who has been targeted by the Western world. And I remember in the 80s, the Organization of African Unity, 2 times they tried to host a summit in Libya. There was no quorum. It was called the Libya 1, Libya 2. And because those people, they have their priorities, they have their strategies, they have not given up until they make sure that Gaddafi is not there. Now, those problems are not new. What we really need as African, we need to discover one another. We have to discover ourselves. And this will depend on how we relate to one another. Because if we do not relate to one another in a way that we are accommodating, and create a situation whereby others will develop natural defense mechanism, we will continue to remain in circles. And that is not going to help our continent, but to help others. Now, we need to build our institutions. They are very important. We are seeing the leadership in the United States of America now, but because the institutions have been there, we see what is happening. And this institution could have not been created today or yesterday, but they could be created over the years. Now, the fundamental for peace, we have identified them, is the equitable distribution of resources, how we allocate them, the ownership of the process, the equal treatment of the citizens, and then to have a common understanding, and the inclusiveness, the youth, the women, they have to be part. And then the African skills, they should come back to the continent. They need to be motivated. It doesn't matter how you got your training. I always say that you sucked my milk as an African woman, and you owe it to me to come back and invest that back into Africa. So that is very important. And finally, moderator, I see you want to stop me. I really want to say Africa must be able to develop her own program, her own agenda, her own priorities, implement them with her own people, with her own funding. And the issue of intra-African trade is very critical. Under Agenda 2063, I'm currently a chair of the African Ministerial Committee for the implementation of Agenda 2063. For this issue of trade between Africa, there is a demand that we must have Africa common trade rules, and also how we can engage multilateral companies.
Thank you so much.
So let us own Agenda 2063.
Thank you so much. Please, Your Excellency.
Well, a very brief remark about the question raised at the audience. About the question was, can we build democracy without Democrats? I think it's an important question, but it must be more precise. Can we build non-corrupt democracy with Democrats? Because the problem is that in the whole world, and not only in Africa, we're from corrupt dictatorship to corrupt democracy. And I can assure you that the main problem everywhere is corruption. And corruption, the lack of national dialogue, those are the principal factors of unrest and of course, even of civil war. So we have to address this very, very specific question. Otherwise, you know, you can have democracy everywhere. You have fake democracy everywhere now, I can say, in the world. But corrupt democracy can be as dangerous as corrupt dictatorship, because the main problem of the population is how to eat and how to enjoy social and economic rights.
Thank you very much.
I have 3 things to say. 1, Africa is not a mitigated failure. And whatever has succeeded, I believe, whether it's at the national, even at community, let us know it, let us replicate it, let us use it. That's number 1. Number 2, I believe just taking a broad brush and paint everybody black or white or brown will not lead us anywhere. And And in a meeting like this, whatever it is, let us disaggregate in whatever we say about others. That's number 2. Number 3, the issue of communication. President called it dialogue. I will say we should talk with ourselves. One of the things we don't have, and we can see it even here, we talk at ourselves. We don't talk with ourselves. I believe Africa will be better off if we talk with ourselves at every level. And if we do that, we will probably make more progress than we are making, both in peace and security and in all other aspects of our national and continental life.
Thank you so very much. Can we give a big round of applause to the panel, please? And to all of you for your incredible insights. We come back to more discussions and more sessions this afternoon and tomorrow, of course. However, let me share this. Following the 2007-2008 violence in Kenya after the elections, I hosted a show called Fist to Five. And on that show, we went into a region and invited victims of violence and perpetrators of violence to sit in the same room. And our effort was to seek the common, was to find out what happened, first of all, and number 2, to seek common ground. On day 1, they couldn't even look at each other. The pain, the anger, the hatred was potent. By the time we had finished 3 sessions of understanding what happened, who did, why they did it, we sought and we found common ground. And my message to Africa is, as we talk, sometimes it feels impossible. Doesn't it? Sometimes we listen to all these things and we say, who's going to do it if the leaders are not responsible, right? It's us. It's all of us. And the biggest message for Africa is, if we try, it will make a difference, ladies and gentlemen. I like to share African quotes. As I'm closing, let me share one, but this time, allow me not to share an African quote. I'm going to share one from I'm a huge fan of Bruce Lee. How many of you know Bruce Lee? How many of you know, yes? No, I can't show you, but I'm a huge fan. And Bruce Lee said, do not pray for an easy life. Pray for the strength to endure a difficult life. And so as Africa, can we just accept it's not easy? We know it's not easy, right? It's not easy. But we have to set up the institutions, the foundations, the processes, and the mechanisms to achieve peace and security. And if we all do our part, we can make an incredible difference. It's lunchtime, ladies and gentlemen. So let's take a break, and we'll be back for more in the afternoon and, of course, tomorrow as well. Thank you so much. 2 o'clock, please, back in the room, everybody, at 2 p.m. Thank you. In fact, 5 to 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I'd like to make a small announcement before we head to lunch. First and foremost, the President will leave first towards the VIP room, where they'll be having their lunch along with the Deputy Prime Minister of Namibia and the Chief Justice of Uganda. The lunch area for delegates, for the rest of the delegates, will be at the Pomolang venue near the garden. So as you walk out, there are ushers who will be glad to direct you to the lunch area. But please, for those who haven't collected their name tags, you won't be able to access the lunch area. So please go to the counter and collect your name tags in case you don't have one. Thank you. Yes, yes. Sijui kama anajua, lakini nimemtangazia.